Hello. In the previous podcast, we went through the actual terms of the Treaty of Versailles. You really do need to know those details, whether it's the territorial changes, whether it's the military terms or the reparations, or other aspects of the Treaty of Versailles. You really need to know those in detail. If you could very well get a question that says, describe the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. And for that type of question, it is just really a matter of cramming the detail into your answer. On the other hand, you may get a question that requires you to analyse the detail. And a very common question is why were the Germans angry, or why did the Germans feel the treaty was unfair? So this podcast takes you through some of the key points that could be used to answer that question. Okay, so first point, German people were angry with the newly elected Weimar government for signing the treaty. Now, you'll remember that the war ended in November 1918 and it took 7 months before the actual treaty was produced. During that 7-month period, for the first 7 months of the Weimar Republic, the government of Hebert was actually reasonably popular. Okay, it crushed the communist revolt, the Spartacist revolt in Berlin in January 1919, and from January until about June, it seemed as if the Republic was going to work okay. But then, as I say, the gun was put against the head of Germany. Remember, it was a dictated treaty. Hebert was asked to send some representatives from his government to Paris in France, where the treaty, the document, was presented to them, and the message was simply, you have to sign, you cannot, there's no discussion over the terms of the treaty. So Hebert, effectively with a gun to his head, because if they had refused to sign, then the French and the British would have started the war again. Hebert had to sign the treaty. Now, we as historians can be sympathetic to his position, but when he returned, there was outrage by the German people at the way the Germans had been treated. And although they blamed the French and the British and the Americans, they also blamed Hebert, they blamed the Weimar government for signing the treaty. Okay, so let's look at the key points here. First one, Germans had not been allowed to take part in the talks. Okay, it was a diktat. Okay, so we've just said that point. So they blamed the new Weimar government for signing the treaty. Okay, we've just said that. Germans felt that the Weimar government had stabbed Germany in the back. So a very common phrase that was born at this time was the stab in the back legend. Now this here to the right is a picture, a very common picture from the time. It shows the German soldiers being stabbed in the back. What exactly does that mean? It means that that for 4 long years, German soldiers had been out in France and Belgium fighting in the trenches, and the way they saw it, they had been winning the war. Remember, when the armistice was signed in November 1918, although Germany was actually in retreat, she hadn't retreated onto her own soil. So many soldiers actually believed the war could still be won. So when 7 months later the Weimar government back in Berlin signed this peace treaty, many German soldiers saw it as a betrayal. They blamed the new government of Germany. They blamed Hebert. They blamed the politicians. They said, we have been stabbed in the back. We have fought for 4 long years, giving our lives, and we have been stabbed in the back. So as you know from a previous podcast, many, not all, but many of these ex-soldiers, so angry about this, when they returned back to Germany, they refused to give up their guns, and they joined politics, and they joined the political groups on the far right wing of the spectrum. And we call these soldiers the Freikorps, the Freikorps in German. So that's the birth of the stab in the back legend, as it was called. Most Germans did not want to accept war guilt or pay reparations. Okay, so again, remember, use the terms when you answer this question, but that is Article Article 231 of the Treaty of the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so most Germans did not want to accept the war guilt clause, and two years later, in 1921, when they announced the actual amount of which was equivalent to £6,600 million or £6.6 billion, they felt that again was a betrayal, and they felt that Germany could not afford to pay or did not deserve to pay. So those are key points. Remember, the war guilt clause, at the time, Germans had been told by the Kaiser, when the war began in 1914, that Germany was fighting a defensive war. Okay, and so although Germany attacked France and Russia, the German people believed they had to do that because France and Russia would have attacked them otherwise. So Germans did not feel that they were guilty for causing the war, therefore they felt they shouldn't be punished for causing the war. Therefore they felt the Treaty of Versailles was wrong. Okay. The Rhineland, remember, was Germany kept it, but she was not allowed to put any soldiers in the Rhineland. Okay, that was insisted on by the French because the French felt that they needed to have a secure frontier, and if Germany were allowed to put her soldiers up to the border of France, then France could be attacked again. So the Rhineland, which was approximately 30 kilometres in width, no German soldiers were allowed to go into the Rhineland, and for a period of time the French and the British put in occupying forces. So that was humiliating, having foreign soldiers on their own soil and also not being able to put German soldiers in that territory. Okay, was humiliating. The third point there, Germany lost 10% of its industry. Remember, Germany lost Alsace-Lorraine to France, although remember that the key point about that, although Alsace-Lorraine included a lot of raw materials which Germany needed for her industry, most Germans accepted that that was probably fair because Germany had taken Alsace-Lorraine from France in a war back in 1871, so France was claiming back what was rightfully hers. Nevertheless, that loss of Alsace-Lorraine was damaging to to German industry, but the other territorial changes hit Germany even worse. Okay, so for example, and you can look back at the previous podcast, remember in the east, the Polish corridor, the land that was lost to Poland. Now that made the Germans most angry because many Germans were living in the Polish corridor, and Germany felt that it rightfully belonged to Germany, but also within the Polish corridor there was again a lot of industry and farmland. In total, Germany lost 15% of its farmland, so its agricultural economy was weakened, and that's a point which we'll return to later on. Also remember, on the border between Germany and France, there was a tiny region called the Saar, S-A-A-R, you need to learn that. The decision was that would be under League of Nations control for 15 years, and then in 1935 the people of Germany, the people of the Saar could vote which country they wanted the Saar to belong to. Would it belong to France or Germany? But for the time being it would be under international control. Well, again, the Saar was a very, very rich coal area, so that loss was damaging to German industry as well. Many people at the time felt the treaty was too harsh. Even people from Allied countries felt this way. The British people were very sympathetic to Germany. Okay, so they felt that the treaty was too harsh. Remember, it was particularly the French who played a key role in making the treaty as harsh as it was, and the Americans, US President Wilson, had originally written what we call the 14 points. He wrote that during World War I, And when the Germans signed the armistice way back in November of 1918, they were led to believe that the treaty was going to be a fair treaty, and that actually was not the case. France and Britain wanted a weak Germany to stop another war, but that was particularly France. That's what motivated France more than any of the winning three countries. Britain to some extent as well, although as I said earlier, that many of the general public in Britain were quite sympathetic towards Germany. And France and Britain got their way, but the USA didn't. But in particular, it was France. And remember, the leader of France, who was one of the key people, was a man called Clemenceau. Okay, so I think the names were on a previous slide. So I won't take you through the remaining slides, but there is a podcast to the question that you're looking at there. Why was the Treaty of Versailles so unpopular in Germany? The podcast will talk you through the answer. That's a 12 marker. 12 markers, remember, times 1.5 minutes per mark, so recommended time is 18 minutes. So you have to ask yourself, could you write for 18 minutes? Well, hopefully this podcast will help you with that. But I have produced another podcast that actually walks and talks you through the answer to this particular question. And if you point your device, if you've got a QR reader, at the QR code at the top, that will take you straight to that podcast. And so, as you can see, there's a grade E answer, a grade C answer, and a grade A star answer, with key points about the strengths of the A star answer. And then there are two other model answers about the Treaty of Versailles, each with a podcast, so the QR code is there for you, so you can go through those as well. First is describe the effects in Germany of the changes made to the armed forces, and the second one is, and that would be a 13-minute question, and the next one is the problems facing the Weimar government in 1923 were caused by the Treaty of Versailles. Now that second one, we'll develop more of that in the next revision session this Friday. So that's the end of this podcast. There's one more podcast on the birth of the Weimar Republic, which is about the Cap Putsch. Now, we didn't have much time on that last Friday, so make sure you go through that one so you're comfortable with the details of the Cap Putsch. Thank you.